Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to begin our first day looking at the Mongols, Unit 2.2, with an emphasis on governance and cultural developments. And we'll also be digging into economics and technology. There's a lot of themes we cover with the Mongols, right? But primarily our learning objective is to begin looking at the process of state building and the decline in Eurasia over time, and explain the significance of the Mongol Empire in the larger patterns of continuity and change. All right. So in class, we begin with our daily 5, where we go over questions, but we've transitioned away from doing those on videos because we're now using College Board questions. So, yeah. All right. So in class, yesterday's class, we looked at this as an SAQ question. Right, so we have this map that's showing us the locations of ruins of caravansaries. All right, so these are the lodging stations for merchants in Eurasia. Right, so and you're asked to explain one factor before 1450 that accounts for the pattern of caravansaries shown on the map. All right. So some possible answers here. Just kind of go through some of these. Improved transportation technologies and commercial practices led to an increased volume and geographic expansion of trade, and explain what those are. So caravansaries, is an example of a transportation practice, but you need a little bit more than that, right? So you make sure you get specific with your example. Right. So in class yesterday, we talked about bills of exchange, paper currency, as such examples. Right. The expansion of the caliphates and the Mongols facilitated Eurasian trade network. So make sure you identify a specific caliphate there. So the Abbasid or Seljuk, right? As far as the Sultanate would be fine as well, right? Just make sure you give an actual example, right, when you do that. Some other examples, right? The routes between trade centers, right, would be another kind of good identification, right? So, and then identify which trade center. So Damascus to Baghdad, Damascus to Cairo, Damascus or Cairo or Baghdad to Samarkand. Give me an example of the city. The Hajj routes, right? So it doesn't always have to be economic. You could talk about the Hajj routes and how how different cities were connected to the Hajj route. So you can identify the city of Mecca, right? And then so the Damascus to Mecca route, right, is really clearly identified, right, through that. So that'd be another good way to put it. You can talk about increased security, right, as a result of the Mongols, Pax Mongolica, and then identify that as being the Ilkhanate, and identify that. Or talk about population density within the Abbasid Caliphate, right, would be another good way to do that. So a lot of ways you could tackle that particular question. All right, so that's what we did in class yesterday. And in class, we went over those and answered any questions. Right? And then just kind of introduced the Mongols. Right? So the Mongols and on my Google sites, there's kind of an introductory video that we played in some of the classes, about 5 or so minutes of that, maybe, just to kind of introduce the Mongols and who they were and what makes them unique. All right. So, and I guess in that video, they do identify a couple of things. So in case you don't end up watching that video, their ability to move fast, to cover ground, right? So, one of the major reasons for their success is their speed, right? So you don't have time to react to them when they simply show up on the horizon, and they're there, so. The lack of advance notice of their approach is one of the major reasons for their success. And then another reason identified for their success are things like brutality, right? Their brutality, or, if you submit to them, your lack of brutality. So, those kinds of things get around. So when they're not approaching you, when they're dealing with, with other things, word gets around about, what happens if you resist, right? Or what happens if you don't resist, and the severe brutality of those towards those who resist, will result in capitulation by many. And so that is part of the factor of why they're successful. And there's a whole bunch of others that you'll see in your homework. All right, when you talk about the Mongols, what are we actually talking about? You're talking about a massive empire, the single largest land empire in history. Stretching from East Asia, right? Stretching from East Asia all the way to to the entire extent of Asia, so into Europe, most of the Middle East. And you're talking about a massive empire. This empire was not all conquered by Genghis Khan. This is when you look at the Mongol Empire at its largest extent, this is through three generations. This is Genghis Khan and his children and grandchildren. Siblings are part of this as well, right? So, but this is his empire. So when you talk about the Mongols conquering China, Genghis conquers the northern part of what is today China, but it was not the Song dynasty, right? This part of what is today northern China had already been conquered from the Song dynasty by a different pastoral nomadic group from up in kind of near where Manchuria is. So this was known as the Jin, right? So that's whom Genghis Khan conquers. It'll be his grandson, Kublai Khan, who eventually conquers the Song dynasty, right? So this is the empire over multiple generations at its greatest extent. All right, and you can notice a couple things here from this map. One is that it is decentralized, right? So we talked about Mongol governance. It is a decentralized empire, right? So this is not, Karakoram is not ruling over the entire empire. These different khanates, and we use that word khanate, right? These different khanates are independently or separately ruled, right? And there's that kind of word right there, khanate, right? So this is kind of more towards a confederation, right, than anything else, because that is the Mongol form of governance before empire was a confederation. All right, so they maintain that as they expand, but they rule over their individual khanates, kind of in similar fashions to how these areas were ruled before. They will adopt local forms of governance. Persian bureaucracies, Abbasid bureaucracy will be adopted by the Ilkhanate. The Confucian bureaucrats, even though Confucianism takes a bit of a leave of absence during the Yuan dynasty. The civil service exams will go by the wayside during this time frame. That Confucian bureaucracy will persist, through this time period, even though it is diminished, right? They will persist and then be revived again by the Ming, right? So you talk about governance. This is largely what you're talking about. Is highly decentralized. As a cultural zone, right? You do see a large cultural zone, but it's ruled differently in different khanates, right? Largely depending on what was in this area previous. Right? And this is also not to say that the Mongols were unstoppable. The Mongols were stoppable, right? There are examples of success against the Mongols, right? And this is from your homework from last night, right? The Mamluks, right? The Mamluks were able to stop them, right around where between Damascus and Jerusalem is today. Right, so the Mamluks were able to stop the spread, right, of the Mongols. Right here, the Japanese successfully stopped Mongol attacks, by Kublai Khan, not once but twice. Right, not once but twice. Java, right, that is actually quite an interesting story where the Mongols or the Kublai Khan's forces are tricked into attacking, and are are eventually defeated there. Vietnam today, right, is another kind of example of Mongol loss. There are examples of people who did successfully stand up, but those are the exception. All right. So let's talk about a couple of things about the Mongols. The Mongols are, by all account, um, the way this empire was created is horrible. Genghis Khan is, attributed to, 40 million dead attributed to him and his actions. Estimates of 1 in every 200 people on planet Earth has a genetic connection to Genghis Khan. These are not great things, right? By all counts, um, the way this happened is horrific. Entire cities massacred. Pillars of skulls. Of children, women. By all accounts, horrifically bad things. But we are 800 years out. And we need to look at this with some perspective, right? Looking at, is there a cultural impact of them? Is there an economic impact of what the Mongols did? Right, so we can acknowledge that what they did, right, how they did it was horrific. But we also need to kind of apply some skills, right, and see what the effects of them were, what they changed, right, and kind of look at them through that lens, right. And of course, we're always looking for examples of syncretism, right. So looking at this image, this is a good example of some of the one of my, one of the well-known examples of syncretism, right, that occurs here. So if you were to ask, what different cultures do you see being, or cultural influences do you see being blended, in as an example of syncretism in this image? So go ahead and take a moment and pause and look at this image and come back when you're ready. All right, so hopefully you were able to successfully identify this as you can successfully identify the dragon, right? So, when kids say in class there's a dragon, I will ask, well, what kind of dragon? So you do need to be able to distinguish between a Chinese dragon or an East Asian dragon and a European dragon, right? So an East Asian dragon is kind of serpentine looking. Whereas a European dragon is more of a kind of horse kind of shape to its body, right? So which one is this? Is this a European dragon or an East Asian dragon? Right, so obviously this is an East Asian dragon, and if you didn't figure it out before, like what about this shape? What is about this shape? Hopefully you can see that this is a geometric shape. And then the next question is, where do we often see, where have we talked about geometric shapes, in class? And hopefully Dar al-Islam will come up. And then, how are geometric shapes used in Dar al-Islam? In the building of mosques and, palaces and caravansaries. That was in yesterday's video. You saw some of those geometric designs. Also, in the Samarkand video, it talked about the blue, right? So that kind of Persian Central Asian blue being used. So yeah, so then the last question is where do you think this tile was used? Right. So we see Dar al-Islam influence, we see East Asian influence. So where do you think this was probably used? Right. So and the answer, this is from the Khanate. All right. So this is from the Khanate. And so the Mongols brought with them Chinese urban planners, right? And we see a lot of imagery here mixed. All right. Okay, so there's a lot of things, and we'll kind of get into more of this after you do your readings. But let's make sure we're aware of the transfers. And I guess this is a good a time as any to start thinking about how you should be kind of applying what you're reading in your homework, right? So as homework, you take notes. As in your homework, you take notes, but maybe you should be thinking about skill application. As you go ahead and you do your homeworks. So if you were to take those, some of the facts from your reading last night and put them onto a chart like this, and in class we built this chart. Where would you put the facts from last night's reading? On this chart, right? So not just writing down facts, but let's apply a skill to them. So in this case here, continuities and change, right? Continuities and change over time. So for example, let's kind of break this down. Where would are Carvansaris a continuity or a change? These are continuities. They existed before the Mongols, right? So we're looking here. I guess I probably should identify that this is Mongols is what we're looking at here, right? So so Carvansaris are something that the Mongols already had in place. They will expand, right? They will expand under Mongol rule, but they were already there. They were continuity. One of the changes identified from your homework last night is that the Italian states, especially Genoa, will be integrated into the Black Sea trade. The Venetians were not favored by the Mongols. The Genoese were. Right? So that is a change. Right? And so you can take this fact, apply a skill to it. Right? So we're going to be working on that and be thinking about that, from your homework perspective. And let me I just kind of cut and pasted this. So let me go ahead and correct. And then we'll be adding to this as you do your, homeworks. Okay. So this might be one of the better ways to maybe just do your homework, is to kind of drop them into this chart, right, and put them kind of appropriately in there. All right. Some other good things. You're going to start to see this in your reading. So I just want to clarify a couple things, and maybe you can put some of this into your chart as well. There is good, right, from a certain point of view. Right, there is good from a certain point of view. So we have this concept of Pax Mongolica, or the Mongolian peace, and that Mongolian peace is going to result in expansion of trade, growth of trade during this period of 1200 to 1450. So we're going to see the growth of trade in cities as a result, and we see the diffusion of not just products, but ideas like gunpowder, right? And this is one of those things that we kind of added to our chart during class. Where would gunpowder technology fall on this map, right? This would fall into, right, let's kind of look, where would it fall on this map, right? So hopefully, right, you can figure it out that it falls under technology and innovation, and this is a change, right? So one of the changes is gunpowder, right? Gunpowder, and so we don't need to waste space with that. All right, so this is something we've already talked about in class, right? It is diffused from China, right? China to initially Dar al-Islam and eventually to Europe. All right, so gunpowder diffused from China to Europe during Pax Mongolica, right, by the Mongols. So gunpowder had been around since, I guess widely known since the Tang era, and weaponized during the Song era, and then that weaponization of gunpowder is diffused across Central Asia because of the Mongols, right? And this, you could always play the historical what-if games, right? What if gunpowder was not diffused to Europe during this period? How would that change things? And, think about, if when the Europeans arrive in the Americas, if there was no gunpowder, is that a good or a bad thing, right? And the answer to that question is from a certain point of view, it could be either, right? So, this is, when you're looking at this, are they good or bad is not really the question. We simply need to understand that this happens and it has consequences. right? There are ramifications of these things, right? So, the diffusion of gunpowder, like, this is an important thing in history, right? And it has major consequences, right? And you can then take this from using the skill of CCOT to what are some of the major effects of Mongol conquest, right? And then you can kind of see how you're jumping skills there. All right, so be thinking about your facts that you see from your reading and be applying it to do some skill application. All right, so Pax Mongolica, right? That Mongol peace results in increased trade during the Mongol, right, kind of a little over 100-year period. And that's going to result in the growth of cities and increase in trade, which will then simply continue after the Mongols get absorbed into the places in which they had conquered. And you're also seeing west to east as well. From Dar el-Islam, you're seeing mathematical knowledge being diffused into there. The Yam system, right? The Yam system, Strayer doesn't use the word Yam. So in your Monday's homework, or your next homework, you won't see Yam. I think he uses the word relay trade. I think is the word that Strayer uses for that. So, but sometimes you'll see it as Yam system, right? The Yam system. Right? So this kind of as a concept. So think about where would that go on your chart, right? And then think, maybe causation, right? What are the effects of this system? What are the causes of this system? Right? So be thinking about skill application, not just this is a fact, okay? Because that's how you're going to get it on a test, right? So Yam system, maybe the world's first passport, right? Or at least an early passport. So some possible, some facts that you will come across, and and that maybe you can kind of think where you're going to put this onto your chart. All right. All right, so that is all for today. It's basically where we wrapped up for today, and within the class I got the furthest in. So Pax Mongolica, right? So there's a concept that you're not going to see in your text per se, but let's kind of be aware of this. The Mongols, what do they care about? They care about taxation. That's what they care about. So you will see long distance trade encouraged. And remember, strong governments usually result in increased trade. Right? Strong governments increase trade. And Mongol governance will lead to the forced migration of a lot of people, as we kind of referenced with that tile, right? Chinese urban planners being brought in. All right, so you have your kind of primary Mongol homework, right, due for your next class. So kind of be thinking about where that information would go as far as skill application. All right, that is all for today. Sapriati.